For decades, the collapsing barn at the edge of town was the ultimate joke. Locals sneered at the rotting wood and rusted roof, calling it a worthless eyesore. But the laughter abruptly died the moment a sledgehammer shattered the concrete floor, revealing a buried secret that changed everything. The mid-morning sun beat down on the rusted tin roof of the old Harrison property, casting long, crooked shadows across the overgrown weeds. Albert Harrison had been dead for exactly 2 weeks, and the town of Oak Creek had already written off his legacy as a tragic comedy. Albert was a man who had spent the last 30 years of his life isolated, muttering about historical preservation and structural integrity, while his own estate crumbled around him. To the locals, he was the town eccentric, a hoarder whose crown jewel was a massive, dilapidated barn that leaned precariously to the left, looking as though a strong gust of wind would reduce it to splinters. His grandson, Leo Harrison, stood at the edge of the gravel driveway, staring at the sagging wooden beams. Leo had driven 2 days straight from Chicago after receiving a stiff, formal letter from attorney Charles Henderson. The reading of the will had been a brief, uncomfortable affair. There were no hidden trust funds, no secret bank accounts, just a deed to 40 acres of unusable scrubland and the infamous broken-down barn. "You know, you'd be doing the whole county a favor if you just struck a match and walked away," a voice called out. Leo turned to see Henry Fowler leaning against the rusted wire fence. Fowler was a local real estate developer, a man whose tailored suits always looked aggressively out of place in the rural Oregon town. He had been trying to buy the Harrison land for a decade, always offering pennies on the dollar, claiming the soil was toxic and the structures were liabilities. "Good morning to you too, Mr. Fowler," Leo replied evenly, keeping his tone carefully neutral. Fowler chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "I'm just being a realist, son. Your grandfather was a peculiar man. Kept to himself, hoarded junk, and let this place become a public nuisance. The city council is already drafting a demolition order for that barn. I can take this headache off your hands. $5,000. Cash. You sign the deed, and you can drive back to the city without looking back." Leo looked from Fowler's smug expression to the rotting facade of the barn. Growing up, Leo had spent summers on this farm. He remembered his grandfather not as a lunatic, but as a quiet, meticulous man who spent hours drawing complex architectural diagrams in the soft dirt with a stick. Albert had always told Leo, "The roots are more important than the branches. Remember that, Leo. People only see what's above ground." "I think I'll hold on to it for a few days," Leo said, turning his back on the developer. "I need to clear out his things anyway." Fowler's smile vanished. "Suit yourself, but when the county fines you for harboring a hazard, don't say I didn't offer you a lifeline." He turned and stalked back to his idling luxury SUV, the tires kicking up a cloud of white dust as he sped away. Determined to prove Fowler and the rest of Oak Creek wrong, Leo grabbed a pair of heavy leather work gloves from his truck and walked toward the barn. The massive sliding doors were jammed shut, the iron track warped by time and rust. It took him 20 minutes of shoulder-bruising effort to pry the doors open wide enough to slip inside. The interior smelled of ancient dust, dried hay, and motor oil. The sunlight pierced through the gaps in the shingled roof, illuminating swirling motes of dust. It was a cavernous space, filled with tarp-covered shapes, stacked wooden pallets, and rusted farming equipment. But as Leo walked deeper into the gloom, he noticed something strange. For a barn that was supposedly abandoned and neglected, the center aisle had been meticulously cleared. At the very back, Hidden beneath a heavy canvas drop-cloth sat an old iron craftsman's workbench. Leo approached it, pulling the canvas away. The bench was spotless. Neatly arranged in the center was a single rusted metal lockbox. Curiosity overcoming his grief, Leo picked up a heavy flathead screwdriver from the wall rack and pried the flimsy brass lock open. Inside the box lay a stack of yellowed papers, brittle at the edges. They weren't letters or journals. They were blueprints. Leo carefully unfolded the largest sheet. It was stamped with a date, November 14th, 1951, and bore the official seal of a defunct structural engineering firm. The blueprint depicted the layout of the Harrison property, but it was drawn in cross-sections. Below the superficial drawing of the barn was a massive, shaded rectangular area labeled Sub-Level Vault. Beside the blueprint was a small, leather-bound notebook. Leo flipped it open. His grandfather's erratic handwriting filled the pages, repeating a single phrase over and over on the final page. "The floor is the door. The floor is the door." Leo lowered the notebook and looked down. The entire barn was built on a massive poured concrete slab, an unusual and incredibly expensive foundation for a simple agricultural building constructed in the early 20th century. He walked to the center of the room, right where the blueprint indicated the entrance should be. He stomped his heavy work boot against the concrete. It didn't sound like a solid block of stone. It sounded hollow. A surge of adrenaline hit Leo's chest. His grandfather wasn't just hoarding junk. He was hiding something. Ignoring the exhaustion in his bones, Leo marched out to his truck and retrieved a 20-pound steel sledgehammer. The mockery of the town, the condescension of Henry Fowler, the pitying looks at the funeral. It all fueled the fire in his muscles as he raised the heavy hammer above his head. The first strike sent a violent, bone-rattling shockwave up Leo's arms, vibrating straight to his teeth. The sledgehammer bounced off the concrete, leaving behind only a faint white scuff mark and a cloud of pulverized dust. Leo took a step back, adjusting his grip, his breath forming ragged plumes in the cool, damp air of the barn. "The roots are more important than the branches," he muttered to himself, echoing his grandfather's cryptic wisdom. He swung again, then again. For 2 grueling hours, the rhythmic, deafening sound of steel smashing against concrete echoed across the empty property. Blisters formed and popped on Leo's palms beneath his gloves, and his shirt became soaked with sweat. Just as he was about to collapse from exhaustion, the hammer struck with a distinctly different sound, a deep, metallic clang. Leo dropped the hammer and dropped to his knees, frantically clearing away the jagged chunks of broken concrete and grey dust. Beneath a 3-inch layer of poured cement, a rusted iron plate emerged. It was a massive, heavy-duty industrial hatch, approximately 4 feet by 4 feet, complete with a sunken rotary wheel lock in the center, resembling the bulkhead door of a submarine. His heart hammered against his ribs. The town of Oak Creek had spent decades laughing at Albert Harrison, calling him a fool for letting his property go to ruin. Completely unaware that he was standing on top of a military-grade bunker, Leo gripped the iron wheel, fully expecting it to be rusted solid. He planted his boots, grabbed the wheel with both hands, and threw his entire body weight into it. With a shriek of agonizing metal friction, the wheel groaned and moved an inch. Encouraged, he pushed harder. The locking mechanisms beneath the thick steel clicked and disengaged one by one. With a final heave, he pulled upward. The heavy door swung back on its massive hinges, hitting the concrete floor with a heavy thud. A blast of cold, stale air rushed up from the darkness, carrying the distinct scent of old paper, leather, and machine oil. Leo grabbed the heavy-duty tactical flashlight from his belt, clicked it on, and aimed the blinding white beam down into the abyss. A perfectly preserved steel ladder descended into a deep, cavernous room. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Leo began the descent. The ladder went down at least 20 feet. When his boots finally hit a solid floor, he slowly swept the flashlight beam around the room, and his jaw dropped. This was no ordinary storm cellar. It was a sprawling subterranean vault, reinforced with thick steel support columns and poured concrete walls that looked strong enough to survive an air raid. The room was immaculately dry, thanks to a complex network of passive ventilation pipes running along the ceiling. But it wasn't the architecture that left Leo speechless. It was what filled the room. In the center of the vault sat two pristine, tarp-covered vehicles. Leo pulled the heavy canvas off the first one, revealing a flawlessly restored 1934 Packard 12, its chrome grille gleaming perfectly under the flashlight beam. Behind it was an old armored transport truck, the kind used by Federal Reserve banks in the mid-20th century, painted in a faded matte olive green. Lining the back wall were dozens of heavy, military-surplus wooden crates, stacked 5 feet high. Leo approached the nearest stack, unlatched the heavy iron clasps of the top crate, and pried the lid open. Inside, nestled in layers of yellowed wax paper, were tightly bound bundles of currency. Leo picked up a stack. It was cash, but not modern money. They were pristine, uncirculated silver certificates from the 1930s, bound in original bank straps. Millions of dollars, untouched, buried beneath a rotting barn. As Leo stood there, a bundle of ancient cash trembling in his hand, his light caught a large, heavy steel desk sitting in the corner of the room. On top of it lay a single, modern manila envelope. It was the only thing in the room that looked less than 50 years old. He set the money down and walked over to the desk. Written on the front of the envelope in his grandfather's unmistakable, shaky handwriting were 2 words: for Leo. His hands shook as he tore the seal and pulled out a stack of documents. The first was a typed letter, dated just a month before Albert's death. "Leo," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means you didn't sell out to those vultures upstairs. It means you dug deep. I've spent my entire life playing the fool so that they wouldn't look too closely at this farm. The money down here doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the victims of the 1952 Central Pacific Bank heist, a job orchestrated not by gangsters, but by the very men who founded the modern town of Oak Creek. Henry Fowler's father, Mayor Gable's grandfather. They stole the future of hundreds of families, pinned the blame on a drifter, and asked my father to hide the vault under the guise of an agricultural cellar." Leo felt the blood drain from his face as he read the names. The elite of Oak Creek, the wealthy, respected families who owned the town, ran the local government, and mocked his grandfather in the streets. "They've been waiting for me to die," the letter continued. "They think the vault is lost, that I forgot the exact location, or that the entrance collapsed. Fowler is trying to buy the land so they can quietly excavate it and reclaim their stolen empire. You must not let them get this land, Leo. Inside the bottom drawer of this desk is the ledger. It contains every signed document, every transfer, and every confession needed to put those families behind bars and return this wealth to the state. But be careful. If Fowler knows you are down there..." Before Leo could finish the sentence, a heavy, echoing sound drifted down from the surface. It was the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Several vehicles. Leo instantly switched off his flashlight, plunging the subterranean vault into absolute, suffocating darkness. He held his breath, straining to listen. Above him, heavy footsteps began to echo against the concrete floor of the barn, right near the open hatch. "I told you he wouldn't leave." Henry Fowler's voice drifted down the shaft, devoid of his earlier faux politeness. "Check the perimeter. If he found the entrance, he doesn't leave this property alive." Leo stood trapped in the darkness beneath the earth, clutching the ledger that could destroy a dynasty, realizing the real nightmare had just begun. The absolute darkness of the subterranean vault felt heavy, pressing against Leo's chest like a physical weight. He stood frozen, his hand still resting on the cold steel of the desk, straining to track the sounds filtering down from the barn above. The crunch of boots on the concrete floor was unmistakable. There were at least 3 men up there, their voices muffled but laced with aggressive urgency. "Brooks, bring the heavy floodlights from the truck," Henry Fowler's voice barked, the sound echoing sharply down the ladder shaft. "And call Sheriff Higgins. Tell him to get a couple of off-duty deputies out to the Harrison property immediately. Block the main access road. If that city kid is snooping around, I want him detained for trespassing." Leo's blood ran cold. The local sheriff was in on it too. It made perfect sense. A conspiracy of this magnitude, covering up the 1952 Central Pacific bank heist, would absolutely require the complicity of local law enforcement. Oak Creek wasn't just a town that disliked his grandfather. It was a carefully constructed fortress designed to protect stolen wealth. If Fowler caught him down here, Leo knew he would simply disappear. He would become just another tragic accident, a reckless city boy crushed by a collapsing, rotting barn. Moving with agonizing slowness, Leo unzipped his heavy canvas work jacket and pulled out his cell phone. No signal. The thick concrete and steel-reinforced walls, combined with being 20 feet underground, completely blocked any cellular reception. He was entirely on his own. He needed an exit. Snapping his jacket over his flashlight to muffle the beam, Leo clicked the light on. The dim, red-filtered glow barely illuminated the space, but it was enough to guide him back to the workbench where he had found the blueprints. He desperately unfolded the brittle, yellowed paper, scanning the cross-sections his grandfather had drafted over half a century ago. His eyes traced the main vault chamber, moving outward. There, in the bottom right corner of the schematic, was a secondary passage. It was labeled Emergency Intake/Exhaust Trench, designed to provide fresh air if the main passive vents failed. The drawn line extended approximately 300 feet eastward, terminating directly beneath the old, abandoned grain silo at the far edge of the property. Above him, the squeal of a heavy flashlight turning on pierced the gloom. A bright beam of halogen light swept across the top of the ladder shaft. "I'm going down," a gruff voice, presumably Brooks, echoed. The metal ladder groaned under the weight of a heavy man descending. Panic threatened to lock Leo's muscles, but the survival instinct took over. He grabbed the modern manila envelope containing his grandfather's letter and the explosive ledger from the desk, shoving them deep into his canvas backpack. As an afterthought, he grabbed 2 tight bundles of the 1930s silver certificates and stuffed them in as well. He needed undeniable, physical proof. Leo dropped to his hands and knees, keeping below the sweeping beam of Brooks' flashlight, and crawled toward the eastern wall of the vault. He ran his hands along the freezing concrete baseboard until his fingers brushed against a heavy, cast-iron grate. It was 2 feet through and held in place by 4 rusted bolts. "Mr. Fowler!" Brooks yelled, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous space. "You need to see this. It's here. The trucks, the cash. It's all here." The old crazy bastard actually kept it intact. "Stay put, I'm coming down," Fowler shouted back, his voice trembling with naked, greedy excitement. Using the heavy flathead screwdriver he still had tucked in his belt, Leo jammed the tip under the edge of the grate and pried with all his might. The rusted bolts squealed loudly. "Did you hear that?" Brooks asked, his flashlight beam snapping toward the back of the vault. The light caught the edge of Leo's boot just as he slipped head first into the exhaust trench, dragging his backpack behind him. "Hey, someone's down here!" Brooks bellowed. The sound of heavy boots pounding against the concrete floor signaled a charge. Leo scrambled forward in the pitch-black tunnel. The air in the trench was thick with decades of dust, cobwebs, and the metallic tang of rust. It was suffocatingly tight. His shoulders scraped against the rough concrete walls with every movement. He could hear Brooks tearing the grate completely off its hinges behind him. "He's in the vent pipe. Get back up top," Fowler commanded from the main room. "He can't get far. Spread out. Find where this pipe leads." Leo crawled faster, ignoring the sharp rocks and rusted debris tearing through the knees of his jeans. His lungs burned, gasping for oxygen in the confined space. The darkness was absolute, playing tricks on his mind, making him feel as though the earth was actively compressing around him. He dragged himself forward for what felt like hours, though it could only have been minutes, until his head suddenly bumped against a solid wooden barrier. He had reached the end of the line, the base of the silo. Muffled shouts filtered through the wood. Fowler's men were already outside, sweeping the overgrown fields with high-powered spotlights. Leo rolled onto his back in the cramped space and kicked upward with both heavy work boots. The rotting floorboards of the silo gave way with a loud, splintering crack, raining decades of dried grain dust and wood debris down on his face. He pulled himself up through the hole, emerging into the hollow, echoing belly of the abandoned grain silo. Through the cracks in the wooden slats, he saw beams of light cutting through the thick fog that had rolled into the valley. "Check the silo!" a voice yelled from the direction of the barn. Leo didn't hesitate. He slipped through a missing board at the back of the structure, dropping quietly into the tall, wet grass. Instead of running toward the main road, where Sheriff Higgins's deputies were surely waiting, he bolted directly into the dense, unforgiving Oregon pine forest behind the property. Branches whipped his face, and his boots slipped on wet moss, but he didn't stop running until the shouts of Fowler's men faded into the distant silence of the woods. He had the evidence. Now he just needed to find someone he could trust. By 6 a.m. the following morning, Leo was sitting in a brightly lit, neon-soaked diner, 3 counties away from Oak Creek. He was covered in mud, his hands were bleeding, and he had spent the last 7 hours hiking through treacherous backcountry to avoid the main highways. Across the sticky laminate table sat Special Agent William Caldwell of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division. Caldwell, a stern-faced man in his late 50s, sipped a black coffee and stared at the items Leo had laid out between the salt and pepper shakers. "Let me make sure I understand you, Mr. Harrison," Caldwell said, his voice a low, serious rumble. "You are claiming that the 1952 Central Pacific Bank heist, a federal case that has been cold for 70 years, was orchestrated by the founding families of Oak Creek, and the stolen assets are currently sitting in a bunker beneath your grandfather's barn." "I'm not just claiming it. I brought the receipts," Leo said, his voice raspy from exhaustion. He slid the ledger across the table. Caldwell opened the book. His eyes scanned the meticulous, detailed entries Albert Harrison had secretly compiled over a lifetime of surveillance. The ledger was a devastating masterclass in forensic accounting, detailing the conspiracy with surgical precision. It included the original manifest, a stolen carbon copy of the bank's internal vault inventory from 1952, matching the exact serial numbers of the recovered cash.
The
bribe records, dates and exact amounts paid to former police chiefs and county judges to look the other way, funneled through dummy construction companies. The confession, a signed, notarized affidavit from Albert's own father, confessing to building the vault under duress after being blackmailed by Henry Fowler's grandfather. The money. 2 pristine bundles of 1930s silver certificates, complete with the original Central Pacific Bank stamps. Caldwell picked up a bundle of the antique cash, inspecting the seal. The skepticism melted from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, professional intensity. The local sheriff is out there right now. Higgins, Leo nodded. He's helping Fowler secure the perimeter. They think I'm still hiding in the woods. They are probably trying to move the vehicles and the cash before the county gets wind of it. Caldwell snapped his cell phone shut after sending a rapid text message. Not today, they aren't. Eat your eggs, Leo. We're going for a ride. 3 hours later, the quiet, mocking town of Oak Creek was rudely awakened by a sight it had never seen before. A convoy of 12 black federal SUVs, accompanied by heavily armed state police tactical units, roared down Main Street, completely bypassing the local precinct. They tore down the dirt road leading to the Harrison property, kicking up a massive storm of dust. Henry Fowler was standing near a flatbed tow truck, barking orders at Brooks, who was trying to winch the pristine 1934 Packard out of the underground vault. Sheriff Higgins was leaning against his cruiser, smoking a cigar. When the federal convoy breached the gates, Higgins dropped his cigar, his face draining of color. Before the sheriff could even reach for his radio, state troopers had him pinned against the hood of his own vehicle, stripping him of his badge and weapon. Fowler froze as Special Agent Caldwell stepped out of the lead SUV, followed closely by Leo. "What is the meaning of this?" Fowler demanded, trying to project his usual arrogant authority. "This is private property. I am a respected developer in this county." "Not anymore, Mr. Fowler," Caldwell said coldly, holding up a federal search warrant. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, destruction of evidence, and the attempted murder of Leo Harrison. We also have warrants out for Mayor Gable and half the city council. It seems your grandfather's secrets just caught up with you." Fowler's eyes darted to Leo, filled with a venomous, impotent rage as federal agents swarmed the barn, descending into the vault to secure the millions of dollars in stolen currency. The empire built on stolen money and local intimidation had crumbled in a matter of hours. In the weeks that followed, the story exploded across national news networks. The Oak Creek conspiracy became the biggest scandal of the decade. The town's elite were indicted, their assets frozen, and the stolen funds were placed in a federal trust to compensate the descendants of the original bank victims. As for Leo, the state seized the stolen cash, but the law had a surprising loophole. Because Albert Harrison and his father had legally purchased the farm, the vault itself, and legally acquired the antique vehicles to serve as a cover for the bunker, the real estate and the cars belonged entirely to Leo. A year later, the rotting barn was finally demolished. In its place, Leo built a beautiful, modern farmhouse. The underground vault was structurally reinforced and converted into a massive, climate-controlled garage. The crown jewel of the garage was the flawlessly restored 1934 Packard 12. The town of Oak Creek never mocked the Harrison name again. They realized too late that Albert Harrison wasn't a crazy hoarder. He was a silent guardian, a man who sacrificed his own reputation to ensure that justice, no matter how delayed, would eventually be served. He had lived by his own words. The roots truly were more important than the branches, and from those deep, hidden roots, Leo had finally brought the truth into the light. What an unbelievable ending to a story of hidden secrets, corrupt towns, and ultimate justice. Albert Harrison proved that true heroes sometimes hide in plain sight, and Leo made sure his grandfather's incredible sacrifice wasn't in vain. If you loved this thrilling real-life treasure hunt and want more incredible stories of hidden mysteries, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel right now. What would you have done with the vault? Let us know in the comments below.